So I'm a teacher and kind of a big nerd. And today I was walking around with my Critical Role Mighty Nine mug that my wife got me from Books a Million. And I had some kids say, "Nice mug. What is it?" And you know, I uh, I kind of wanted to explain this to my students, um, and I wanted to attempt to place it on the spectrum of nerdiness and trying to kind of visually represent the nerd rabbit hole, as it were, to give them an idea of how much of a geek handshake mug this kind of is, without boring them to death. And middle schoolers, if they ask the question, they're kind of interested. So I wanted a quick graphic, so I Googled up rabbit hole and I got this, and then I tried rabbit hole cross section and I got this, and I was pretty frustrated all in all. So I opened up Adobe Illustrator and made a thing, albeit a very simple thing, the nerd rabbit hole. And in order to prevent it from looking phallic or anything like that, these are middle schoolers, I went ahead and created two branches as you get lower down in the nerd rabbit hole, the more socially acceptable branch and the basement dwelling outcasts branch. So as you look at this thing, you've got stuff that barely counts as nerdy anymore, that kind of goes up near the top of the rabbit hole. Things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, stuff like that, that are just so mainstream that, I don't know that they count as nerdy. And then you've got like the cool hipster nerds who are like, wow, we are such nerds. I know, right? Let's go get a latte. And then you've got your like basement dwelling nerds that don't even know if they bathed this week, and that's kind of the less acceptable channel. So I play Dungeons and Dragons, and to put that on there as it existed prior to probably 2015, it would fall down in the basement dwelling branch about that far down. And just to give some perspective here, we've got Harry Potter up here, we've got the MCU movies. Star Wars is kind of moving down into the rabbit hole, as is Game of Thrones. Playing popular video games is pretty mainstream now, but kind of nerdy still. Playing retro popular video games, so video games that were pretty mainstream but are old, are a little bit further down. If you're playing like MMORPGs these days, like World of Warcraft, you're way down here, along with the D&D crowd. But if you're playing Final Fantasy, that's pretty nerdy, but still more socially acceptable. And then, of course, you've got, your Star Trek people, your Twihards, your Whovians. Those are all down the more socially acceptable branch. Whereas, if you're watching Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime, mainly because they did such a terrible job with that show that the only people that are going to watch it are us poor people who love the books and are still being beaten to death by the show. Um, the Vox Machina cartoon is down here too, although that's partially the reason that D&D has kind of moved up, but we'll talk about that later. And then you've got your cosplayers down here, which tend to be slightly more attractive people that are just cosplaying to go to conventions and stuff. But if you're cosplaying to do LARPing or live action roleplay, you are well down in there with the creepy basement dwellers. SCA and Ren Fair folks are kind of in the middle. They kind of bridge the two worlds. They're really deep into it, but it depends on where you live and what's cool and what's socially acceptable. And of course, as I said, D&D has kind of moved up into the more mainstream, but that's thanks to people watching Stranger Things, and somewhat because of the hipsters watching Critical Role play D&D on the internet. Of course, if you're just watching other people play D&D on the internet, that's still a slightly more nerdy activity. And then I got to thinking, okay, I made this for my students, but who else might need this? Like, could wargamers make a cool infographic out of this? What about model railroaders? Collectible card game enthusiasts, retro toy collectors, board gamers, geocachers, I don't know. What else could fit on this thing? Like, if I'm just talking about role playing games, yeah, Dungeons and Dragons might fit on there near the top somewhere, but what about, old school Renaissance and retro clone D&D stuff? What about Blades in the Dark? How nerdy are the people that do that? Numenera, Call of Cthulhu. So, I decided to put this out there and say, hey, make some memes and infographics. Enjoy. I'd love to see what you come up with.